Everybody played other AD carries before Tristana and Corki is still broken. There's only one thing to do, Nemesis. That is fight fire with fire. You know who you have to lock in. You know who you have to play every game until she gets nerfed. She's waiting. She's waiting. Kayle mid. Question, do you plan on giving a buff to Gwen or rework? Gwen is no longer being played in competitive on the 2% pick rate in solo queue. I'd like to do something with this champion that's completely forgotten. Personal take is we probably should buff her. Secondary personal take is I wonder if her items are working. The AP attacker items changed pretty meaningfully when we removed Omnivamp from the system. I wonder if she's able to play as well as she needed to with that. But that said, I don't think it's actually really an item system thing. I think it's more just she's probably a little sag. I think personally, Gwen is a character that we are supposed to be buffing if she is never seen in pro. Now, the counter argument to this is technically Gwen is balanced. And when I say that, what I mean is, if you look at Gwen's win rate for like people who have mastered her, she's quite good. One of the reasons we don't necessarily buff Gwen is that Gwen looks like a fairly strong character when mastered. And one of the issues, though, is that she doesn't feel very strong when she's not mastered, and so a lot of people never get over that hump. And so an argument for not buffing Gwen is that if we were to buff Gwen, the people who are really good at her would be overpowered. So that's a thing where it's like, yeah, we could buff Gwen. Personally, I do think she might be a little weak, and personally, I do think that if she's not seen in pro at all, it might be an indication that she needs buffs. But on the flip side of things, if you look at like her stats in terms of win rate and stuff, when you've mastered Gwen, she does seem to be doing totally fine. I think another thing about Gwen, though, that's actually pretty difficult is, I don't know if Gwen is supposed to be super high mastery and super high skill. I don't know if her theme really matches that fantasy. Like, a lot of people look at Gwen the same way they might look at a character like, say, Seraphine and be like, oh, she's a cute girl, and I'm just going to go play her and snip people with scissors, right? And then it turns out, actually, Gwen is like this really, really difficult to play character with extremely high mastery in terms of, like, the value you can get out of her mechanics if you do it right. And so I do wonder if there's maybe a mismatch in terms of the people who want to play Gwen and the gameplay Gwen actually offers. I think it's similar. A character in a similar situation is Gnar. Gnar's a character, like, you look at him and you're like, oh, he's just a cute little guy like Teemo. And then, like, actually, if you're, like, high MMR, you can just, like, completely abuse people with, like, mini Gnar mechanics. And so he's kind of a character where I think similar to Gwen, it's like the people who look at his splash art and want to play him might not necessarily be, like, the people who can actually play him. So, yeah. Lero says Gwen is easy. And, like, this actually just, like, kind of, like, I think shows what I'm talking about. One of the problems Gwen has is that she seems easy and she's not. So as an example, Gwen is a fairly weak laner until you master what her W lets you do. Her Gwen is immune zone. And then the second you've mastered spacing with the W, Gwen becomes a fairly strong laner comparatively to before you do that. And that's very unclear that that's a thing. And so it's very easy to look at Gwen and be like, this character is easy, she's basic, she does nothing. But then some of her like really, really high tier mechanics that she can take advantage of completely flip the script in terms of how strong she is as a laner and in the game in general. But it's just not obvious. And I think that's a hard thing too, is the way to get good at Gwen isn't obvious. Compare that to, say, a character like Yasuo. When you screw up on Yasuo, it's fairly easy to understand why. You're like, oh man, I died on Yasuo. If I just die 8 more times, I'll win, right? Like that's the Yasuo formula, is die once, die 8 more times, and then you'll hit your power spike and win the game. Pog. If you die on Yasuo, you're usually like, oh, I should have E'd better here, I should have Q'd better there, I missed this spell. It's fairly obvious what happened. Whereas when you die on Gwen, you're not necessarily like, oh, I should have auto-spaced them with inside my W and moved it so I was inside and they were outside, and then I have 175 attack range to like manage the gap. Like, it's just a lot less clear what you did wrong when you fail on her. And that can be, I think, rough for learning a character who is quite difficult and quite high skill cap when you actually figure it out. Hey, Nemesis. If Nemesis is still here, he said, what did he say? He said, get the 80 carries out of my lane. So we just nerfed Tristana and Corki. Are you running into other ones now, Nemesis? Like, are Corki and Tristana replaced with Zeri and Lucian? Let's see. What's happening in Master plus solo queue right now? Let's go to mid lane. Ooh, looks like they kind of fell off. They're still pretty present though, but it's shifted back towards like mages and stuff like that. Oh man, Aurora's looking pretty good. Aurora's looking decent. Zed, Hui. Yeah, there's some of these guys still lurking around, ready to pounce on people. Everybody played other AD carries before Tristana and Corki is still broken. Well, there you go. There's only one thing to do, Nemesis. That is fight fire with fire. You know who you have to lock in. You know who you have to play every game until she gets nerfed. 1 second. Finding her. She's waiting. She's waiting. Kayle mid. Hop on it. It's time. Time to bring it back. It's actually pretty decent right now, at least in terms of win rate. I'm assuming in Nemesis's MMR, though, it's not actually good. Kayle has a hard time being good for really, really good players, but she's definitely viable for the average player in mid lane right now. I've been playing a lot of Laura, but she seems weak against challenger players. Yeah, I would guess Aurora probably struggles a bit against challengers due to some like range restrictions, but I don't know, she seems like somewhat decent. Is there a systemic reason assassins feel bad in higher elo right now? As a high diamond master Fizz OTP, assassins and Fizz definitely feels super bad to play. I understand they are technically not weak, but it kind of feels miserable and solo queue assassins are supposed to thrive. Random side note, bone plating feels effective. A mage taking bone plating. Okay, so the question is like, is there a systemic reason assassins feel really bad? And then they mentioned, I know they're technically not weak. Here's my opinion. This opinion is my opinion. It is not necessarily shared by other folks. I personally believe that assassins are weak. They're just bad. So when you say, oh, I don't think they're weak, I personally believe they're weak. And the reason I think they're weak is they aren't good at doing what they're supposed to do, which is kill you in a frame. And that's a little hyperbolic. Obviously, you know, some assassins have more gameplay and more time to kill you than others, but I do not think, especially at the highest level of play, that assassins are truly good at instantly killing squishies right now. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons is we nerfed things like Serrated Dirk, which was an early game spike, and so as an example, it's a lot harder for Zed to start snowballing. One of the reasons is the way that wave crashes happen, it's harder to roam, and one of the ways assassins get ahead if they're playing against a defensive mage in mid lane who just clears is they roam and try to kill side lanes. That's a lot harder to do. One of the reasons is we buffed XP in the bot lane, meaning one of their primary preys, the AD carry and support, are just throughout the entire game have more health, armor, and MR. And so one of the reasons is we've nerfed the burst on a lot of items, as well as nerfed the burst on runes, and also just straight up removed some damage runes, like, not removed, but like changed pretty significantly some damage runes like Sudden Impact. And so I think if you look systemically how League has changed over the last like year and a half, I would argue the ability for a burst character, especially a melee assassin, to truly jump on someone and reliably burst them has actually gotten a lot worse. And I think that like is one of the reasons you're seeing people say like, hey, I feel like these assassins are weak, I feel like they're not very good. Or the reasons you're seeing things like, hey, there's 5 AD carries in the game. I think one of the reasons is like, there's 80 carries are supposed to be prey for assassins, and right now maybe they aren't, right? And I think that, to me, I think it's like just, that's what's happening here. And I think the other thing to note is there's a big difference between burst in League is high and assassins can burst you. So a lot of times when I talk about like, I think assassins should burst you more, one of the responses will be like, but didn't you guys nerf damage? Like, isn't burst damage supposed to be lower? What about the durability patch? My opinion on that is the purpose of stuff like the durability patch is so Leona doesn't burst you. The purpose of the stuff like the durability patch is so Zac doesn't burst you. To me, it's like, it's actually really good that we've increased durability in the game, because there's a lot of classes who kill you from full instantly that, while building things that they shouldn't allow them to do that, right? And so overall durability going up in the game, I think has been good for the most part, because it means Leona bursts you less, Zac bursts you less, but I still think that that means certain classes still should just instantly kill you. If you get rooted by Lux late game and you're an AD carry, my opinion is you should just die. If Zed is fed and he catches you without your support to protect you, my opinion is you should just die. And I think that's actually really important for the game, that like the game has this like triangle between burst, sustained damage, and tanks. tanks counter assassins, assassins counter AD carries, AD carries counter tanks, you know, as the game progresses, right? Like, I think that's generally a good thing where you have this interplay of classes who all do a certain thing and they, like, you know, counter and play against each other. And so my advocacy personally is not, oh, we should just make burst go crazy, but I do think that assassins might be in a spot where they're having a lot harder time one-shotting people as reliably. And I think that's probably one of the reasons people say they feel a little rough.